Because we learn things from our parents. And just like Tommy learned to be terrified of dogs, I, as a child, came from a family where a little girl's opinions don't matter, and they should not be expressed. And I learned to be a doormat. In fact, I call myself a recovering doormat. And around the same time as this experience with Tasha, I became aware that there were people, even women, who were not afraid to speak their voice. And I found this fascinating, and I started to look at it a little bit more closely. And so I found out that there's actually two types of boundaries in people. The first one is a physical boundary. And just out of curiosity, how many of you here work in an environment where you're in an office with a receptionist? By show of hands. So not so many. How many of you here work at home in an office? A few are. So when you go into an office, the physical boundary is pretty specific, right? You know that this is the receptionist, and that smile says, I can't go through until she says so. And so the physical boundaries are very obvious. And if we close a door, we know that, okay, this is off limits. But when we're in our home office, and I started working at home, in my home office, my 14-year-old drama queen would come home from school and need to tell me about everything that happened. Even if I was on the phone with an important client, she would come into the door, she'd play with the things on my desk, and she would thump impatiently while I was trying to get some work done. And so I had to tell her that this doesn't work for me. And of course, as a 14-year-old does, she ignored me and continued to do it. So I set up a physical boundary, and it was so simple. It was a piece of paper that I pinned from the door jamb in her face that said, unless you are bleeding, do not bother me. And she stopped doing it. Physical boundaries are easy. But the more difficult one are the psychological boundaries, and there's actually three. And the first one would be something called a rigid boundary, and we all know them. They don't have a lot of friends. Okay? I had a boss, Mr. Moss, and he was from Russia, and he was a brick wall. And if he decided something, nobody was going to cross that boundary. In fact, his boundaries were so psychologically limiting that at one point he had an office with a bathroom, and all the other employees shared these other bathrooms. The bathrooms went out of commission. For 3 days, we didn't have any bathrooms. And what happened is most people would not even go in there and use the bathroom, and I certainly was one of them. In fact, I went across the street, and what's really funny is he wouldn't have found out he was out of town for a week. Now, that's a strong psychological boundary. What if you found it? Now, I was a different kind of boundary. I'm what you call a very diffused boundary. And that's kind of like a jellyfish. You kind of go this way, go that way. And in this same office, I remember sitting on the phone with a client, and one of my colleagues came in, and she started rifling through my drawers as I'm speaking to a client. And I felt very uncomfortable. She was in my personal belongings. She had run out of staples, so she was looking for see if I had any. It never occurred to her that it would make me uncomfortable, because I always sweetly smiled when people made me uncomfortable. And that's called a diffused boundary. Now, if I was to work there today and she came to get staples out of my drawer, I'd be putting my client politely on hold and saying, what are you doing? That is called a healthy boundary. And that is where we have structure, and we also are slightly flexible. So think of a backbone, how we can move, but it stops there. So that's what we're looking for when we think of boundaries. Okay, so thank you for playing along. I know we had very little time, but even in that short period of time, it took this long to change what was happening. And really, our problem is not what we're thinking of doing, it's what we're dragging from the past. Remember Tasha and the little boy? Remember how this little boy and this mother have a pattern? Now, I'm asking you to, and I know we haven't had a lot of time to reflect on this, but the people in our lives, the behavior in our lives, in our business, that are sucking the life out of it, I'm going to suggest that there are people in your family that also draw the same type of energy from you, and these people have something similar. I see laughter. And so that's the thing that I want you to take home, is the behaviors of people are the problem, but there are triggers, and that's what brings us into fear, obligation, or guilt. And when we have those, we think we have to do it, obligation, got to finish all these emails, that's where we get stuck. So, what I'd like to do, thank you, I'd like to know, first of all, was this of any value?
Yes.